4 points from 2 Easter matches have left Norwich City firmly in the hunt, but it's hard to shake that feeling of missed opportunity after a goalless draw against Rotherham United at Carrow Road on Bank Holiday Monday. Welcome back to this week's edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast in association with Future Radio. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, and joining us to pick through I'm trying to think of an appropriate Easter saying. Pick through whatever Easter saying you'd like to apply here is Paddy, Davitt and Sam Seaman. Before we come to football, we've got to talk Easter. Paddy, how many Easter eggs did you get? It's a crucial question to start the pod.
Well, now I have a little person. They get directed to him. I had to go. I didn't have to go, but we was with his grandparents on Easter Sunday. Basically, my role was to keep his rucksack open so he could put all the eggs in from his Easter egg hunt round the garden.
It's an important job.
It is, yeah, and he got 13 of these little eggs, but so far I've managed to siphon off about 3 of them. So I'm working.
What, you've eaten them?
Yeah. Oh yeah. You know, he likes the idea of the egg hunt, but I don't think he's overly enamoured with eating 13 eggs. So it's a win-win. But no, that's very nice actually, because we had the game Friday and then travel back on the Saturday, and it felt quite nice to have a bit of downtime in between the joyous experience of what we've just witnessed at Carrow Road here on Easter Monday. So yeah, all in all, some good this Easter, some not so good, and I'll let you decide which part of that is the family and which part is the football.
To be fair, I did an egg hunt with my boy, and he picked up all the eggs and then decided he wanted to hide them again so he could refine them. So I think it is the aspect of the hunt rather than the achievement. Maybe that's a metaphor for Norwich City season. I'm not sure.
Apparently his grandparents then announced as we were leaving their place that they actually thought they'd put more eggs out. So somewhere in their garden is a random collection of eggs. So we'll probably find them next Easter. Yeah,
well, the problem I have is that I've got a dog, which, dogs and chocolate don't mix. So I kind of had to make sure that, and he's a young dog who would eat said eggs as well. So I don't really fancy another trip to the vets. Anyway, Sam, how's your Easter been? Any Easter eggs for you?
Not over the Easter weekend.
Well, you had them prematurely?
Of course, yeah. It was actually... I was surprised by how cheap they are. It's my first year not living with my parents, so first time I've been.
What did you go for? You've walked into a shop. You've got an absolute choice there. You've got Cadbury's, Nestle, other ones. You can get them specialist ones from some shops, like the gourmet ones. Which ones have you gone for?
Not made of money. I've bought an embarrassing amount, to be honest with you. I've maybe bought 4 or 5 different ones over the time. Mini eggs probably right up there. I think that's best part of the Easter thing for me. But no, I've probably had 5 or 6 eggs before Easter and then none over the Easter weekend. So it's been a bit backwards. But I'm led to believe my grandparents have one for me back where they live. So I suppose I'll have one in like May. So that'll be exciting. But yeah, didn't really resemble Easter in any way, the actual Easter weekend, apart from... as Paddy says, joyous trips to the football. So that's been good for sure.
Not a bit controversial. Not a massive fan of mini eggs, which is
really
that's
so poor.
Not my favourite
thing. They might be up there with the very best confection.
I don't like the hard shell soft centre mix.
I think it's good.
That's not for me. I tell you what I did have. I had a custard cream cheesecake that my sister made, which was absolutely disgusting in terms of calories, but wonderful in terms of joy.
For you personally, as an addict, as we discussed, I think, on a previous podcast.
It's true.
So we're going from biscuits to eggs, chocolate variety. There's a bit of a theme developing here. Is this food corner we're going to have?
It should be, shouldn't it? Let's talk football then, Pad. I mean, as we said, 4 points for Norwich City, which I'll drop it in now. I did predict
how long did that take? That took all of about 2 minutes. We've been recording here, 3 minutes. You joyously announced as... almost to the extent where you didn't want Norwich to get a winner today.
That's not true.
That's what I'm going to say. The glee with which you turned to me about, I don't know what time, it was about 80 minutes.
About 13 minutes in, wasn't it?
No. Second half, late second half to announce, and I'll let you announce it because I don't want to spoil your take your thunder.
Well, I said we ended the last pod in terms of our predictions. What did you go for? 3?
I can't honestly remember.
You went for 1, which is disgraceful, by the way.
Yeah, I do record him saying 1, yeah.
But I went for 4, but not only did I go for 4, I said a win at Ewood Park and a draw at home to Rotherham. So I should have put money on it.
Yeah.
But anyway, the point is, How are you reflecting on that? Because even though it feels like a productive total, and I think if you kind of flipped it and maybe the draw came at Ewood Park and the win came today, we'd probably be sat here viewing it a little bit differently. But on the back of what we've just witnessed at Carrow Road, it's hard to shift that feeling, as I said right at the start, of missed opportunity today.
Well, that's it in a nutshell, to use the egg theme. But it is that. It is the feeling of it all. I mean, as Wagner himself said after the game, within the last hour or so, disappointing result, frustrating. But he was happy with the performance, and we'll drill into that. I don't necessarily tend to agree with his breakdown of that, but it does feel frustrating. It does feel disappointing, and that is very much a reaction to what we saw conversely at Blackburn in quite a lot of adversity injury-wise, which we'll get into again in more depth now we've had an update. But the manner that they played that day, the goals, when they've struggled so badly to score goals in the previous 4 games, and again, today was a very flat post-Millwall-esque kind of parallel that you just thought, right, here we go, it's come back together again. The path to the top 6 was opening up. They win again today. Then they're in the top 6 tonight. But unfortunately, we got more of the same at Carrow Road over the entirety of this season, which was, a failure to really convincingly sort of prove that they were good enough to dispense with a well-organised, well-drilled, spirited, but for me fairly limited Rotherham team, and far too comfortable for them. And I know we'll get into the nuance of where the chances came, but overall, bar 1 or 2 opportunities at the beginning and the end of the game, far too comfortable for Rotherham, and that should never have been the case today, even allowing for the mitigation of the injuries, even allowing really for the quick turnaround, 2 days, and all the effort that was expended to get that result at Blackburn, just to throw that in today, and you just leave Carrow Road feeling flat, and the material element of that is that they're a place poorer tonight. They're 8th in the table tonight, albeit they're still a point from the top 6 as they were at the start of the day, but it feels again like reverse gear rather than you thought after Blackburn, you win this game today, which they should have done. Then the pedal is firmly depressed again, and they go to Middlesbrough in real good spirit and in the top 6. But wouldn't be Norwich if they didn't do it the hard way.
No, it felt very on brand, didn't it, for this season, which is why I probably made the prediction that I did, slightly tongue in cheek, even though it's actually come to fruition on the last pod, because you get a performance like we witnessed at Blackburn, which was so positive and had so many good characteristics, and then you see this kind of inconsistent streak back and the struggles and that kind of real stodginess and sluggishness to kind of produce a performance at home. I mean, it's 1 point now in 3 matches at Carrow Road, which isn't by any means playoff form, promotion form, however you want to sum it up. And that is probably why people find themselves where they are tonight, Sam, in terms of the majority that I've seen feeling quite disappointed and quite dejected by that performance, when, again, I'll use the word opportunity. They had that opportunity to really lay a marker down, and if they 1 goal, they'd have been sat in 5th. It looks very different, and maybe this is a little bit kind of reactive to the result, but we will come to the performance. But it was an opportunity to put things in their hands, which isn't something that they've had really since David Wagner came into the building, and once again they've stumbled. It kind of sums up where this team is at and has been all season.
Yeah, I think the worst bit is just that people are really fed up now of this pattern, and I think I said to you after the Blackburn game it will be good. I'm glad they've got a positive result, because at least for once the PinkUn podcast won't sound the same, because we're saying the same things.
I don't know, we had a nice chat about eggs.
No, it's true, the eggs was a highlight, but every
Professional
time,
athletes as we are, I should say.
yeah, every time it comes around to Norwich City though, we're left talking about the same things and saying the same things. So yeah, I think it really is quite frustrating for those people who can see the patterns happening over and over again. And I think every football fan likes to make that joke of, they'll go and beat the top team in the league and then lose to somebody who they really should be beating. But Norwich absolutely have epitomised that this season. It feels like most of the times they've been required to perform in a big game, they haven't. And when they have, they followed it up with some really abject results and really struggled to build on that and put any form into their performances. So I can understand why Norwich fans are really fed up, especially given I think it's easy when you just look at the results as a whole to say that it's been inconsistent, but in front of their home fans, which is the large majority of fans who watch the games in person, by the way, it's been a poor season. It's not even been inconsistent or average or disappointing. It's been overall, I think most clubs would be disappointed with this season at home. So the number of fans who probably this season haven't been to too many away games and have had to turn up week in, week out, or bi-weekly, whatever it is, to come and watch quite disappointing performances and an impotent team, really, is probably reflective of where the mood is, and probably helps you understand quite where things have gone wrong and why the mood is so down when results like this happen. Because we should be here discussing actually a really quite good weekend for Norwich City. As you said earlier, if they had got that draw at Ewood Park and then beaten Rotherham today, as probably people would have predicted and probably as they should have done, it would feel quite a lot more positive. I don't think it actually has been a negative Easter weekend for Norwich whatsoever. They're 1 point away from the playoffs. They're certainly closer and in a better position than they were when they travelled to Lancashire. But it's just the fact that Norwich fans are probably at this time thinking they're never going to get away from this pattern and they're never going to be able to watch their team again without knowing that in a week's time, if they've been good, they won't be able to back it up. And I think that's a task that David Wagner's got to drill into and got to work hard on, because Dean Smith wasn't able to do it, and we've seen the end result of that in terms of his time at Norwich. So I really do hope that they can put this behind them, and there's 5 games left of the season, so they're certainly not going to now prove themselves as a consistent, impressive team who churns out performances week in, week out. But at least with potential Premier League promotion on the line, surely they can find a way to beat teams that they should be beating, and they haven't been able to do that today. So I totally understand why it feels so down, despite what I think has actually been quite a positive few days for Norwich City.
Yeah, I would agree. And again, that kind of feeling that there is after this game, whether that will be the same on Tuesday or on Wednesday or whatever, when maybe we've had a little bit more time to reflect on the league table more widely, is for a different debate. But it's hard kind of sat here after the game to feel anything other than frustration and that sense of missed opportunity, when the reality is they've made ground on Blackburn and Millwall, both who have dropped points today. You've got teams in and around them who, barring Preston, who are on an incredible run of form, won again today at Reading, haven't really been able to capitalise on the fact that Norwich and others are kind of spluttering, and Norwich haven't been able to capitalise on that fact either. But the reality is they're 8th in the table, they're 1 point off 5th, isn't it? So they have actually made ground up over this weekend, Pad. So that's kind of where the feeling that exists after this game is quite strange, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean it is, but there's teams who have the odd. I think Blackburn have got a game in hand now, haven't they? So it's slightly skewed for me. I just think rightly that there should be that palpable sense of disappointment, because for me, I tweeted it, I think at the final whistle, it was the latest in a catalogue of missed opportunities this season. I take the points you boys have made overall, and maybe with a bit of distance later in this coming week. Now, you will reflect, and given the injury issues as well, particularly at Blackburn, it wasn't the worst of Easters in terms of points haul, but there was an opportunity there at kick-off today, bearing in mind Blackburn,
it's catching. I've started something.
Have dropped 2 more points, although they might spin it as they came back to get a point at Huddersfield in the lunchtime kick-off. But even more evidence that the path has opened up, and Norwich just need to seize their opportunity this afternoon. And after, it has to be said, a very positive first 15 minutes where I felt you could see the confidence from Blackburn. 4 or 5 real good opportunities, and the way impressively they were playing through Rotherham and getting in behind, and there was a directness in wide areas. There was service for Teemu Pukki, which hasn't always been the case of late for him, and from that point, 15 minutes onwards, then to effectively just kind of retreat and go into their shells. We've seen that trait so often from this group of players, irrespective of the head coach. We've seen it under Wagner, we've seen it under Smith, and just you've got the opportunity there. Go and grab it. These players are good enough. They've shown that in individual circumstances, in the odd smaller samples of consistent performances over the entirety of the season. But when push comes to shove, like today, found wanting again, really, and that for me is justifiably where the frustration is. If you're a Norwich fan, you've turned up. Sam's point is right. You've turned up more often at Carrow Road this season and left disappointed, and they'll leave disappointed today. And to be fair, Wagner again did acknowledge result-wise, hugely disappointing, but he still felt, and I think, on reflection, when I think he's talking about performance was good and elements of it were good. He also, in the press conference, talked about the emotions and not getting too high, not getting too low, and that's probably even more marked at this stage of the season. They do need to keep more of an even keel, and I think maybe his messaging today was more to try and do that, to try and both internally and externally, just sort of limit the feeling that that's it, game's up, because conversely, after Blackburn, they wasn't in the top six. It wasn't a done deal. So, and it's going to be like that between now and the end of the season. So, I think you can probably read a little bit of, he's trying to, set the right tone for the week ahead, which obviously culminates in a very testing game at Middlesbrough. And in a roundabout way, we discussed this as the game was unfolding. I think they'll probably have a better opportunity to go there and beat Middlesbrough for me, because I think, and we'll get into the weeds of this, I think Middlesbrough will play in a style more akin to Blackburn in terms of Norwich will be able to profit on the counter. And it's clear in my own mind now that Wagner, if it's a counter-attacking type of game, then he seems to be able, that fits his eye. He's got the players he feels that can play that, and that is effective. They do look clinical when they're playing that type of game. But again, today, as for most of this season, and the results at Carrow bear it out, when they're essentially told, you're going to have the ball, you're going to have a lot of the territory, try and break us down, they, more often than not, when push comes to shove, have failed to do that. And that's a real issue for me in the short term, but also, whatever league Norwich are in next season, because if it's the Championship, teams will more often than not come to Carrow Road and challenge Norwich to break them down. So he needs to, on a broader level, decode, because that's the challenge they're going to face more often than not. But bringing it back to the here and now, I think if you are disappointed as a Norwich fan, you're right to be. If you are frustrated, you're right to be, because Wagner himself, he fueled it post Blackburn and pre Rotherham. He wanted the fans to turn up and sing like they'd never sang before, and match the intensity and ferocity that you hope to get from his players. I think the reality is a 0-0 against Rotherham at home, when you've mustered maybe 3 or 4 shots on target. That intensity, that energy, that endeavour, all the things we saw at Blackburn, we didn't see it enough today. And as a result, it's more of a holding pattern rather than what we should be reflecting on. I think tonight is top 5 in their own hands, and they go to Middlesbrough full of confidence, and that isn't going to be the case now.
Yeah, I think you've touched upon a good point, which has become obvious. That this Norwich City team is better when they don't have the majority of the ball, when they aren't up against a low block or even necessarily a high press in that regard. They want to kind of be the counter-attacking side, the counter-pressing team in this. They want space to exploit. They want Onel Hernandez running into space. They want Josh Sargent running into space, which is really interesting when you consider that summer transfer window in 2021. A lot of their business was geared towards moving them to be that type of team, albeit that was Daniel Farker, and that was the aim a couple of years ago. It's a completely different division in a completely different context, and now they find themselves probably capable of doing that, when arguably, particularly at Carrow Road, they probably need a different set of players. So for David Wagner, particularly when you look at the home games left to come, which are, you're going to have to help me here, Swansea, Blackpool, there's another one, isn't there? Or is there? No, there isn't. No. Swansea and Blackpool. Swansea might be slightly different because they are a side who like to have possession, so that may actually end up being a game that suits Norwich City. But particularly on the final day against Blackpool, and I guess more broadly, it feels like they're going to have to find a different solution to playing at home, and that is probably evidenced by the form that you touched upon all season, but specifically the last 3 games, which have been obviously 1-0 defeats to Sunderland and Sheffield United, and obviously a 0-0 draw against Rotherham. So that's not a goal scored in the last 3 home games, which is pretty dismal.
Yes, very bad, and the worrying thing for David Wagner will be the lack of options as he tries to sort that out. I think it was evident in his substitutions today that Norwich don't really have that many options that can come off the bench and change things, and they don't have many players who they can bring in to try and change the way that they attack and the way that they approach those games. I was speaking to fans after the game today, and the very first person I spoke to, one of the first things they said was that Norwich have never replaced Emi Buendia, and I think that's, as much as it's probably a bit of a broken record at this point, and it's something I've certainly banged on about a good deal, it's something that becomes more and more evident with every single home game, and they don't have that player at all.
You could even park Buendia. You could even argue it's a Kieran Dow-like figure, couldn't you? That kind of creativity, and I suppose his absence has hit them quite hard in that regard, as Onel Hernandez's did when he was out.
Yeah, certainly, and I think those injuries really are taking their toll, because for me, Marquinhos isn't really a creator. He's more of a finisher. He wants to get on the ends of things, and he's got decent technique, but he doesn't seem to have that spark for me. And then you're relying on, a lot of the time, Teemu Pukki to take on three players and score from a difficult angle. And at his age and his situation, it feels quite unlikely that that's going to be a very profitable source of creativity from now on. So without being able to play that counter-attacking style, I'm not sure Norwich really have a way around that until the end of the season. Then they've got a summer window where, admittedly, with the finances, if they don't go up, Stuart Webber's going to have to pull another rabbit out of the hat in terms of finding that creative player. There you go. Thanks very much. Not on purpose, but I'll take it. I think until the end of the season, for sure, they're in a really, really difficult position unless they can find a way of maybe inviting teams onto them. Maybe they get their own fans a little bit on edge by passing around at the back slightly more than they need to draw in that press and then try and play beyond it, because that's the only game in several weeks, that Blackburn game, where they've looked capable of creating chances, and that was because Blackburn wanted to play that expansive, possession-based style, and they wanted to leave that space in behind for the likes of Liam Gibbs, Josh Sargent to go and exploit. And I think part of the attacking conundrum for Norwich is whether Isaac Hayden can play a part for the rest of the season, and as I'm sure most Norwich fans, have my doubts as to the various problems involved with that, and of course the time he's spent on the sidelines. But without him being able to fill in midfield, it looks like Liam Gibbs isn't going to be able to play that advanced role that he thrived on so much at Blackburn. And I thought instantly his partnership with Josh Sargent looked like a dangerous one, and the flick-ons with his running in behind really did provide a dangerous option for Norwich when they were on the counter-attack. So I think there are a number of parts that maybe don't work in Norwich's favour but could. And if Isaac Hayden can come in and play that proper defensive midfield role, and it's a big if given how his season has panned out so far, it might release Norwich to play the style that they want to. So there are probably options there, but quite a lot of things do need to fall into place for Norwich for them to be able to do that. And they haven't quite been falling into place for the whole season, really, so it will be tough for sure.
Yeah, if David Wagner was sat on one of these chairs next to us and he was reflecting on this Easter weekend, I'm sure he would be keen, as he probably was after the game. You spoke to him. I haven't had an opportunity to listen or watch any of that back yet, but I'm sure he would have spoke about the mitigation behind these results and the fact, particularly Rotherham in particular, they were without Grant Hanley, and he's obviously going to be out for a prolonged period of time now, set for surgery on a ruptured Achilles, which usually keeps you out for about 6 months at the very least, but particularly with professional footballers can be a bit longer as it kind of builds up. So I think they'll get a clearer picture once his surgery is done. Ben Gibson is out for the season as well. Regular season could make the playoffs if obviously Norwich City make the playoffs, and Kenny McLean as well, who's obviously out with a knee injury. Marcelino Nunez currently out as well, although whether he'll be back for Middlesbrough we'll have to wait and see. But he would point towards the fact that Jakob Sørensen was playing as a centre-back, that Liam Gibbs, who has been playing in a more advanced role, we've obviously seen him in a six earlier on this season, was playing alongside Gabriel Sara, and they maybe didn't have that option for the natural balance which helped them so much at Blackburn. I mean, how much does that come into the thinking, the fact that there were injury concerns, and this was kind of a needs-must team to an extent? We saw Teemu Pukki with Josh Sargent again, which has been a formula prior to Blackburn, which left them quite dry in terms of goals, but not necessarily because of those players, but more about the wider structure and the wider service. So is there merit in that argument from David Wagner today and after this game, do you feel?
Yeah, there is. But then by the same token, how many chances did they carve out with that current lineup today in those positions in the first 15 minutes? They at will created chances. So I'm at a loss. I'd have to go away and look at that in more detail. Why, for the first 15 minutes, with Sorensen in the back four, with Gibbs alongside Zara, with Pukki up the top and Sargent tucked in behind, were they able to function effectively with the ball? And then clearly Rotherham reacted. It looked like they went a bit more solid across midfield. Maybe they got their press a bit more cohesive from the front, and thereafter Norwich very difficult to play through that. And again, that comes back round to the point about Carrow Road and teams who are going to present those challenges. But in that 15-minute sample, they managed to do that. So yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, the centre-back one is the big one, because ultimately what that more or less does is rob you of Jakob Sorensen now as a holding midfield option for the rest of the season.
It's a massive blow for him, isn't it? It feels like every time we see him in that midfield role.
Yeah, but look at the Black. Just go back.
Millwall as well is another example.
But Blackburn, both of those goals are sourced from Jakob Sorensen passes. First time, instinctive passing forward, quality, and then obviously thereafter we know how those goals played out. But at heart, both of those, the common denominator was Jakob Sorensen. Gibson isn't going to be back before the end of the season. I don't really buy Wagner's sort of tantalising carrot about if they got in the playoffs and he could be available. There's a lot of potentially in those sort of statements. The same with Kenny McLean. But no Gibson, no Hanley. They can't recall because we asked him directly after the game. Tompkinson from Stevenage. So what you're left with? You're left with Andrew Omabama-Daly, Jaden Warner, but again, completely raw, untried development prospect. He's not going to get thrown in the deep end. So it's Sorensen, basically. And that...
Sam Byram?
Yeah, well, there is Sam Byram.
Future Norwich captain?
Yeah, no, well, yeah. But I'll resist the temptation to make a joke on that one. But, okay, he's in the equation, and we may start to see him. He's on the bench today, him and Hayden. But I think given his injury history and the need to sort of, they haven't got 5 games for him to bed in. They've got 5 games, haven't they, effectively? So... it has to happen now, and I think it'll be Sorensen. So that is detrimental in terms of the midfield mix then. Yes, Gibbs was good in the holding position today, and Wagner actually voluntarily talked up how good he was, in contrast to what he said earlier in the season about he didn't think he had a physicality at this stage of his career to play that 6 in the Championship. But today he was singing from a different hymn sheet. So it didn't sound like Gibbs was going to be back in and around the 10 position for Middlesbrough onwards. And I think that's ultimately where we need to zero in here, because the Pukki, Sargent, even Ida when he came on again, that axis has palpably not worked in terms of giving them the thrust at the top end of the pitch. To take your point on Dowell or a Buendia before, none of those are facilitators. They don't link the dots. They're very different functional type of forwards, all with their strengths, no doubt about it, but very similar, all bracketed the same category for me. So that, for me, is now the big issue, is if Sorensen has to stay in the back 4, if Gibbs has to stay in a holding 2 alongside Zara, what's happening in those 4 positions at the top end of the pitch? Because they'll need to score goals. Wagner said it again after tonight's game. You can play well, but now it's about scoring goals, and... you've had another goalless affair at Carrow Road. Can they really see a Pukki, Sargent, Ida axis with Marquinhos and Hernandez in the mix, creating the opportunities that they need? And for me, no. Is that the wind?
I think so, yeah.
Is that the wind? Yeah. There's an ill wind blowing, I know that. But so it's hard to sort of pick a way through that. Núñez potentially could be available. Sounded like from what Wagner was saying after tonight's game after Middlesbrough, and we all know he has the ability to play in those pockets. But I don't know. It's very tricky now to see what Norwich can do, because they're limited in terms of the personnel and where other personnel have to fill in. But it's for Wagner to try and find solutions to that conundrum. But if they don't, and if you're reliant on a sort of a Pukki with a Sargent or role reversal and an Ida in the mix and a Marquinhos and Hernandez, that doesn't get the job done for me in these next 5 games. So it is, for me, a massive issue. And heaven forbid, I don't even want to talk this up, but, what if a Sorensen or Omabama-Daly get injured from now on? I don't know. Then it would clearly be in you come Sam Byram, but they're on the thinnest of thin ice now in terms of the injuries, and that's of course not in Wagner's making. That's the hand he's been dealt, and it's a tough one now. But I'll reiterate, and I didn't really know until the Rotherham manager came in for his post-match. It sounded like their first choice keeper got injured yesterday, I think he said, in training. So, what Norwich are going through maybe is more marked, but it's certainly not unique to Norwich. Every club in the Championship at this stage of the season are dealing without influential players, and I don't think it's sufficient just to say, well, throw your hands up. What can you expect us to do from here? They need to find solutions. We were told consistently before a ball was kicked that this squad was probably as strong a squad as in terms of depth as any in the Championship. Well, now's the time to see it.
Yeah, and for as much as we're talking about mitigation, we're talking about that largely in terms of defensive positions. Yeah, we find the frustrations came in attacking areas today. Rotherham didn't pose too much of a threat beyond Tariq Fosu's chance in the first half. Now, you could argue, of course, that that mitigation at the back has led to maybe a switching around of the pieces at the top end of the pitch, which has had an effect. But as Paddy says there, if what Norwich had in terms of their attack was Onel Hernandez, who at this level has proven himself to be more than handy, Josh Sargent, who was signed for £8 million, Marquinhos on loan from Arsenal, and Teemu Pukki, who scored 88 goals for Norwich City. I mean, that should be a front four capable of producing and scoring goals, right?
Yeah, definitely. But I think Paddy highlighted the problem with that when he said that they're all sort of functional forwards. Onel was probably the only one in that quartet that I really see laying chances on a plate for others, and I think he actually did that 4 or 5 times today. To be honest, he could have been far and away man of the match if somebody had put away one of the chances that he'd created. But you look at the others, and as much as I understand Josh Sargent as a sort of number 10 is more of a positional thing, and for listeners I've put it in air quotes, I know it's more of a positional thing than an expectation or a role thing. I don't think anybody's expecting Josh Sargent to fulfil the same role that Emi Buendia did or Kieran Dow does when he's at his best. But that's maybe the problem. That it's all positional and it's all based on who fits in where, and it's kind of it feels a little bit almost FIFA-esque to me, the way that Norwich are almost just plopping their players in. If they're an attacking player, just chuck them in an attacking position. And I felt that was quite a big weakness of Dean Smith's setup, especially with his substitutes. Often late in games, it would just kind of be like, oh, well, we need to score a goal, let's replace a midfielder with a forward. And there wasn't much thought, in my mind at least, about how players would work together and how tactically those things would develop, because I think Wagner actually said it in a recent press conference after the Sheffield United game. It doesn't matter how many strikers you've got on the pitch, some teams play without one and win 5-0. And Norwich, as an example, I think had 3 or 4 on the pitch in that Sheffield United game and had their first shot on target not from any of those strikers in the 92nd minute. So I just don't think they've got enough of a tactical idea of where those chances are going to come from. I think Wagner probably does have his own ideas of identity and style and how he wants his teams to look, but maybe not in an in-depth attacking way. I think that was one of Daniel Farke's strengths actually when he was head coach, and I don't want to go too far back, but for me that's the last good example of a Norwich team that looked like their movements were planned and they knew where they were going. And if things weren't quite coming together from a just go out there and play and be creative and do what feels natural standpoint, it felt like they always had a little bit of a tactic to fall back on. There was always a way of getting Max Aarons to the byline, and when that happened, Pukki knew to come back to the penalty spot, or a way to find Onel Hernandez cutting in. And for me, there's too much go out and play, boys, you're all attacking players, and not enough consideration of how they fit together, not enough of a jigsaw coming together in those attacking positions. So as complex as that is, I don't think they're going to solve that problem in 5 games, unfortunately. So it's a bit doom and gloom, but they might have to muddle through for now, because those things are complicated to implement. There's a reason why it took Farke a season of quite boring performances and inconsistency, even with somebody like James Maddison, and it's because these things take time to bed into players, and Norwich City unfortunately don't have time. They do have a lot of good players who probably can produce good individual moments, but how many things from earlier on in the season are we now coming back to, where we were saying earlier on Dean Smith is the problem and Dean Smith tactically has got things wrong, but still they're relying on good moments from individuals. Still they're showing inconsistency, and still there's not too much evidence of a tactical approach that's yielding chances. So yeah, I think it's more to do with the setup than the players, but they don't have that player, especially while Kieran Dowell is absent, that can go and create those chances, and that's an absolutely massive problem and probably up there with Stuart Webber's priorities in the summer. And if it's not already, then it certainly should be, because they've had a massive hole in their team for nearly 2 years now, and the evidence of what it does to this team and how it affects them isn't going away.
No, it isn't. So just to conclude on the Easter fixtures then, just to kind of wrap that up, 4 points. Norwich have made ground on the playoffs. I think if you were to give it a grade, Pad, just very quickly, what would you kind of give 4 points in terms of a grade?
B.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Sam?
Yeah, B minus.
B minus. Yeah.
We're going American.
Yeah, I think that's. Do we do minuses over here? I don't think we do,
Yeah.
which is a good job for me and my education. But anyway, I think that's about fair. So I think we've probably made the arguments there for the positives and probably the question marks rather than the negatives, which lends us nicely to speak about some stuff obviously that's happened this week, and let's start with the main headline that emerged prior to the Blackburn game, which was obviously the news surrounding Teemu Pukki. He's rejected Norwich City's offer of a new contract. He'll be leaving the club in the summer after 5 years, 88 goals, 205 appearances, I think it is now. It's really interesting because it feels like we're probably going to be talking about two things in this conversation about Teemu Pukki: his legacy and his record at Norwich City, which are probably going to be unbelievably positive, and obviously the hole that he's going to leave in this side, mainly goals. I mean, me and Sam were looking down in the Norwich programme. They have a list of all the appearance makers and the goals, and actually beyond Teemu Pukki, there's not a lot of goals in this Norwich City team. I think Josh Sargent is the next highest with 15 to put it in context, and then I think it's Kieran Dowell with 11 or 12. So beyond Teemu Pukki, there isn't many goals in this team. How big of a blow is it to lose him this summer, irrespective of the fact that we probably all knew that it was coming, and I'm sure Stuart Webber and Norwich City did and are planning accordingly?
Well, that's the key. They surely would have known for quite a way out, and Wagner, I think, more or less confirmed that he's known for quite some time, and obviously the public messaging of that was in the last sort of week, 10 days. But yeah, I mean, we're talking about some other priorities maybe in terms of that very creative midfield type in the summer, but ultimately you lose Teemu Pukki and you haven't got a track record of proven goal scoring from Adam Eder or Josh Sargent, then they'll need to address that. They certainly couldn't go into another campaign irrespective of the league, but with the current roster of forward players, and that isn't going to be easy, because we know from, and maybe this is the juxtaposition when we start to get into Pukki and a discussion of his legacy, but that normally you go into the market, top dollar is commanded by strikers, because strikers score your goals win your games, goals win your promotion, goals win your titles. And you wrap all those things together, you do have Teemu Pukki, but crucially, a free transfer, which for me puts him at the very peak of any modern day discussion of a Norwich player. If it's value versus delivery, then he's probably top. I don't think Tim Krul probably in the same category, but in terms of return for what they spent on him, and that's pertinent because a lot of the discussion around Webber, particularly now, is about failings in transfer markets past, transfer windows past, and money that's been spent for a return which has been modest, to be polite in some cases. Well, that's certainly not a charge you would ever level at him. In fact, that was an inspired piece of business, not all down to him, but obviously him and his recruitment team.
I think about 7 people have taken credit.
Yeah. It's one particularly who's no longer with us, and I think his power in Middlesbrough's rise, but that's for another pod. But phenomenal piece of business initially, then the coaching to fit him into a template that, gave him the platform to do what he did in not just the 2 championship title winning seasons, but also in the Premier League, in 2 overall fairly abject attempts at top flight sustainability, he was the shining light. I think both times he got into double figures, which at Premier League level in a Norwich team in the last two attempts,
in a bad Norwich team,
is in its own way probably more, certainly equally, but if not more so, an impressive feat than the bag full of goals that he scored the first Championship season. Not quite to the same levels, but the second time around again he was prolific again. But to do it in a Premier League in a Norwich team which was, and squad not fit for purpose, no praise is too high for him, really, in terms of his legacy and the indelible mark that he's left on what this club have done in the last 4 or 5 seasons. But, to bring that right up to date, I mean, this season, it's not a vintage Pukki season. His goal return tells you that.
Is that him, though, or is that the team? I guess that's where the debate has kind of found itself.
Yeah, it's everything. I certainly wouldn't, hang it all on him. But, he's found himself in a team that, by dint of them having to change the manager, has clearly not been performing to a consistent level. And him within that hasn't found a template in terms of midfield players around him to extract what we know he's capable of still, I think, because, that burst he had in the first part of the season showed you in a team set up to get the most out of him, he would still score goals, and I'm convinced of that. He would have had a lot more goals this season if the midfield mix had been right around him. Not to keep labouring that point, but it hasn't been vintage, and for me, it's the team more broadly, but clearly the contractual situation around him. I think it's no doubt spoken to plenty of people out in Finland, journalists who are close to his people, his camp, if you want to call it that, and he wanted away last summer. He clearly felt he wanted another opportunity, probably in the Premier League, because he was, I think, 31 that point, and it didn't happen. And I'm not questioning anything about his professionalism, because the eulogies that have come forth since the confirmation tell you that he is a phenomenal player and a phenomenal professional. But the fact that, in his own mind, he probably felt he wanted the opportunity to go and explore other avenues last summer, that's got to have played a part. I think the edge isn't quite in his game. He's had injuries. Confidence, which is a point you made during the game today. I think that is a factor, even for an experienced striker. When you're not scoring goals, you're not taking chances. And you can see today, in fact, to bring it right up to date, the 2 chances he had, snatched at them, and both times, the camera zones in on him, and he's just looking skyward. The frustration in his body language, he knows, because he's in those situations before at this level, particularly been so clinical. And it's just not the Pukki of old. And maybe that's age as well. He's turned 33 now. His powers have dimmed. So there's a myriad of reasons, I think, why this Pukki isn't the Pukki of the 2 previous times in the Championship. But you'd still hope, just for the positive, upbeat end to this story, that he does find his goal touch between now and the end of the season. And whether that's good enough to, A, get them in the playoffs, and then, B, actually come through the playoffs, time will tell. It doesn't feel that's going to be a scenario that's going to play out, but you'd still like him to, it would be quite sad, I think, if he bailed out now without adding to his tally. I think that chance of edging Ewan Roberts out of the top 3 is gone in terms of the all-time scoring list. But, irrespective of that personal accolade, when the final whistle blows against Blackpool on the final day at Carrow Road, and if they're not in the top 6, he should get an ovation befitting his status and his service. And then you can only wish him the best in what will probably be the last big move of his career, and that there is still some fuel left in the tank. And it's just a bit sad for me that this season, it's probably been a season too far, really. And I think you completely understand why the club were loath to. Can you imagine the messaging last summer? You've got relegated and Pukki's departed. How that would have been a very tough sell, I think, to try and message that out. So, from a club's point of view, protecting themselves and keeping that asset, of course, they were going to trigger that extra extension. But I just think now, looking back, it probably last summer was the time for him to move on. But there was no succession plan in place, and at the moment, there's no succession plan in place, because I don't think either Vida or Sargent look like a player capable of assuming his mantle. So for me, the solution probably lies outside the club this summer, and that's going to be very interesting to see where they find the sort of the answers to who replaces Teemu Pukki, because there's no doubt about it. The hole he leaves will be a chasm, and it's imperative that they do solve it in some part. Whether it's it's probably a stretch to say that can they find another Teemu Pukki style signing. I don't think that's possible, but they do need to do something, and it has to be creative given the finances or lack of, because as we've seen now, when he doesn't score, Norwich don't look like scoring, and if they don't score goals, then very hard for them to hit the heights that they would hope to achieve, which, as Webber has restated since Wagner was appointed, is to get back to the Premier League. Well, they're certainly not got the armoury at the top end of the pitch in this squad, and more so when Pukki leaves, to say that's a realistic goal. So I think you do have to separate out the legacy and the career he's had from this version of Pukki, which for me is a pale imitation of what we've seen before.
Yeah, there was a good piece of punditry from Daniel Sturridge, which I know might not be the most obvious, or maybe the natural assumption to assume, but he was speaking recently on Sky Sports about strikers, and it was specifically going through on one-on-ones, but I think you could broaden out more widely. And he said when you're a striker and you're in form and you get sent through, you're thinking about scoring. Whereas when you're not on form, you're thinking, can I hit the target? And that kind of feels a little bit where Pukki is at the moment. He's taking extra touches when he doesn't need to. He's kind of overthinking stuff, I think. And even if you've played football at a very limited level, I think you can understand, and particularly as a striker, you can have moments where almost seemingly you don't do anything and you're able to score, and it seems effortless, and you can kind of just wave your foot at stuff and it flies in the top corner, and other points it's so frustrating and you're almost trying too hard to score and overthinking and overcomplicating stuff. And I just wonder if that's where he is at the moment, even at the age of 33, even as someone who's done it all respective to Norwich City and is obviously Finland's all-time goal scorer as well. So I don't know, that's interesting in terms of modern day. I mean, Sam, in my 23 years of life and less watching Norwich City, he's the best striker that I've seen in terms of all-round game, in terms of intelligence, finishing, probably what Paddy said there in terms of being dropped into a style of play that suited him down to the ground. Where does he rank for you, I suppose? And obviously we can't talk about Chris Sutton and various. I can't even really talk about you and Roberts, to be honest, let alone others. But where does he rank for you in terms of Norwich City greatness?
Yeah, for me in my lifetime it's basically him or Grant Holt, and I'd say based on the level that he's scored most of his goals and the numbers that he's produced over the last 15, 20 years, it's difficult to find somebody else who's done that. And you look at the longevity, and I think I tweeted it at the time, maybe Ewan can match him for that and can compete with him, but you look at a player who for 5 years has performed and produced the numbers that he has, as you said earlier, scored 22 Premier League goals in two of the worst sides ever to have been in the division. I think the longevity at the top level is really hard to match for Norwich City, especially given the model that they've got, and perhaps they've benefited from his age in that sense. I think he was 28 when they signed him. If he was 22 when they signed him, no doubt.
This is very very subtle, Pad. No. As he attempts to close a window.
The game's up, you'll have to tell.
You just had to do it, didn't you? But there we go.
I mean, it's after the horse is bolted.
Well, exactly. But it's closed now anyway.
Yeah.
Carry on, Sam. So you can remember your train of thought.
No, that's right. Now that Paddy's eliminated that interruption, it's I think I was just saying he's in terms of the longevity. If he arrived at Norwich at 22, maybe he goes after 2 years, but they've maybe got lucky with the fact he signed at 28. He didn't have too much of a reputation coming into the club, and they've benefited from 5 full years of a top level striker, and that's not something that Norwich fans unfortunately are going to see very often, especially with the growing chasm between clubs like Norwich and this sort of top level clubs. So I think what he's achieved for this football club is pretty amazing, to be honest, and he facilitated in a very big way probably the most entertaining Norwich City team of all time. I know a lot of people will say 92, 93 and stuff, but in terms of the advancement of football and the way that they played under Daniel Farke, they couldn't have done it without him. And, they tried with Dennis Sebeni and they couldn't quite achieve it. So that shows you quite how important he was in that system. It's easy to talk about Emi Buendia, who's obviously gone on to be sold for nearly £40 million, but can he play those clever passes if he doesn't have perhaps the most intelligent striker in the Championship making the movements that make them worthwhile? And I'd say probably not. So, yeah, he, for me, is one of the key cogs in one of the most exciting Norwich City teams of all time, probably the team that made fans happiest. And, yeah, he'll go down as a real legend. And it feels quite strange, actually. I fully expected him to go. But when that tweet came through on my phone of the club confirming that he was leaving, it really felt like a huge event, and I don't think there are many times it feels like that. So he goes down for me in the sort of top 20 Norwich players in terms of legendary status and how he's going to be remembered. And you can't really appreciate it now, as you never really can when a player leaves a club, but maybe in 5 years we'll look back and think how lucky we were to have watched Teemu Pukki as much as we did, and for him to have represented the club as much as he did, because I think after he's retired, everyone will remember him as a Norwich City player and as somebody who represents this club. And what a fantastic accolade that is for this club, given what he's done. And you have to praise not only the footballing ability, as David Wagner said, but the attitude, the personality, the commitment to the cause. And yeah, as Paddy said, you have to commend the people that brought him to the club as well. But yeah, for me, he goes down really in the upper echelons of what players have achieved at this football club. And it will be quite a sad day when he does depart Carrow Road.
Yeah, goat by name, goat by nature. As we're sat here on Monday evening, lots of reports from very reliable outlets that former Norwich City head coach Dean Smith is set to be appointed as interim boss of Premier League side Leicester
Why
City.
Are you laughing, Connor?
Well, I was going to come to you, Pad, on an unrelated note, and just ask you, when was the last time that you feel you landed on your feet?
Yeah, I'd have to think about that. Working with you lads, obviously, goes without saying.
Good answer.
What
do you
I'll
make
tell you
of
what,
it, though?
no. I've got a better one than
Go on,
that,
then.
because I've
Go on,
been
then.
flippant about that. Obviously, it goes without saying. But when we pitched up at Tottenham one Sunday in their new stadia, so it would have been second Premier League season, and they had a nice Sunday roast on.
Oh, it was good. Wasn't
We
it?
landed on our
It
feet
was
that
good.
day. Yeah, I think they got beat, but
Smith might have been in charge, actually.
levels. I think he was. I mean,
yeah.
it was the 3-0. It's
Yeah.
come back to me now. 3-0. Yeah, it was around about December time, wasn't it?
They were in
Yeah.
that horrible salmon kit, weren't they?
That's right, yeah, they were, yeah. On Bambadeli, I think that was the only game he played for Smith, on an unrelated point, because he had the back spasm issue. But
Let me tell you
So-
just about that roast before you move on. There was stuff on that plate, and I still don't know what it was, but it was
But you ate
absolutely
it?
wonderful.
no, that was a high-class piece of cuisine, and
We've got back to food again.
yeah, that's- blame you for that. But it's pertinent. I'm talking about centre-back in Omar Bambadeli, and from what you were telling me, that maybe JT, as he's known colloquially, John Terry, is going back
Is he
in
your
with
mate,
him.
is he?
No, he's not my mate. No, he's a mate of Dean Smith, clearly. And obviously Shaky, I'm sure, will be in the Sharabang. And as
The
you
gang back together.
as you pivotally pointed out, Connor, I believe Leicester's training ground has a 9-hole golf course, so it's a win-win all round. But yeah, no, fair play to him. Good luck to him. Like, on a personal level, our dealings with him, he was good as gold. But that is some touch if he lands Leicester, albeit it looks like a Leicester who are heading back to the Championship, and it's only, by all accounts, a short-term salvage type mission. So, you know, he might be out of a job again come the summer, but I guess he's looking at it, it's no lose, isn't it? If he goes in there and has even a half-decent impact, albeit in a losing cause, then he puts himself back in the shop window, doesn't he? So could be quite an astute move for him. But yeah, given how it ended in terms of Norwich, to be landing a Premier League gig, however long or short, within the space of, a month, a couple of months maybe, he's got a good agent.
Yes, yeah, it's a funny old game, isn't it? Various strange appointments. What I did want to mention before we get on to Barrow, I want to ask you a quiz question, which is, I realised this week, it's not really a quiz question, it's more an observation, but it clicked in my mind earlier this week as to why Abu Kamara was number 47. Can either of you work out why? I don't know if this is the actual reason. I presume it is. What if I said it was gun related? Take his initials.
AK.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Funny that, isn't it?
Is it on purpose? If it is, that's quite...
Does he have a good shot on him? That's what I want to know.
That's so clever. You should have saved that for the newspaper, to be honest. It's a shame you've wasted it in audio form. But, yeah, I don't know. If he's done that on purpose, then congratulations.
Surely he has. That seems very...
But
like
part of me
coincidence.
thinks also Liam Gibbs is number 46, so they just chucking him on the next one, you know.
Yeah.
What's Rowe? Rowe was 40... He was 46 before...
What was he
I
now?
don't know. He was 40-something. Now he's 27.
Yeah,
It's good
Tetty's
knowledge.
old number.
Yeah. So maybe they're just chucking him on the 40 production line and Kamara's got lucky. But if he hasn't, you know, maybe I'm not giving him enough credit.
Surely he's had a say.
We'll have to ask him
Yeah.
when we interview him next. That'll be the first question. Abby, what's the reason behind your number 47? But that's...
Well, I think we'll know if he keeps it, surely. Because at some point, if he gets more involved with the first team, you tend to find they get given a lower number. If he keeps the 47, then we know it's a branding thing.
And talking of that, again, I don't know why it's just entered in my head. Did you see that over the international period just gone? That Shane Long, former Republic of Ireland Reading striker,
Yes.
about shirt numbers and how he knew his time was up with the Republic. There is a Norwich link to this because he had to present Adam Eder with his first Republic of Ireland senior shirt. And he only knew at the point that he handed it over in presumably some sort of squad ceremony that he was basically giving him his number 9 shirt. Because if the number 9, then you're the main man, aren't you? Even in modern numerical ridiculousness of all sorts of numbers. So it matters. Yeah. So,
Will you have a number 9, Pad?
No, I never played that further forward. No. But I'm just trying to think what number's the GOAT. Because that's going to be up for grabs.
22, yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
Number 9 is
Boring,
vacant.
innit?
Number 9 is vacant.
Yeah, didn't Pukki... That was another story, actually. Pukki got offered number 9, but he turned it down because the 22nd is his wife's birthday. I remember that.
Oh, isn't that lovely?
Yeah, that's nice.
It's lovely. Right, Borough, which is increasingly a massive game. And I think in the context of what we've discussed, probably makes it a bigger game. And Andrew Omobamidele alluded to that today. And it was always going to be a big game anyway, going to the Riverside Stadium. But because Norwich have missed this opportunity, they're playing before a lot of their championship rivals. If they get beat at Middlesbrough, there's an opportunity. I think Millwall play Preston, don't they? So at least one of those is guaranteed to drop points. I don't know where Blackburn are off the top of my head. Hull is where they are at. But it gives an opportunity for the margins and the point margins to increase. They could be as much as 4 points off. The playoffs come the next time we record a podcast. So feels absolutely massive.
And this is why, to take it full circle to what we were saying right at the start of this podcast, this game, Rotherham, Easter Monday, missed opportunity because you get the win today, you're 5th in the table, you're inside that cut line, and then for me, then you go to the Riverside and you get a point, and that's a good result because the chances are with those fixtures you've mapped out there, by the end of this coming weekend's fixtures, you're still going to be in the top 6 with a point. That isn't going to be the case now. They're playing catch-up. They've lost ground again today. That's why this feels a real
Must-win
blow. Yeah, Rotherham. But no, I wouldn't quite categorise it as must-win. But
must not lose.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. No, you don't put any points on the board at Middlesbrough. Even though other teams aren't really grasping Preston aside in that pack.
But the problem is you can't
but you're
keep
losing,
assuming that's going to be the case.
No, exactly. And then it'll be 4 games left, and then it's, we'll move on to the next game. At some point, the next game is now, and it has to happen now. And that's why, after Blackburn, you thought, right, that the penny has dropped. I think I remember saying it to Wagner at Ewood Park after the game, that he probably didn't even have to motivate or deliver any sort of stirring oratory to his team pre-Blackburn, because they'd have looked at it and thought, today's the day. We have to perform. We have to win this game for all the reasons. And they did, and they delivered, which is why it's so frustrating 2 days on, mitigation aside, they haven't grasped the same sense of urgency in today's performance, when you would have thought the cards were firmly in their hand and the win was firmly at their backs. And, that won't be the case against Middlesbrough. I'm pretty sure they'll be, in terms of possession and territory, on the wrong side of that. But as we've discussed at points in this podcast today, that might suit them, that type of game. Albeit, Middlesbrough, I think are a better side than Blackburn. So if they get that type of dominance in terms of ball possession and territory, you think they might take it. But yeah, definitely must not lose. And then we'll see where they are come the end of that weekend. But I think their chances have taken quite a fatal blow for me today with that Rotherham result. Not because there's not enough games and points for them to clamber into the top six, but I just think the self-confidence that will be dented by not following up Blackburn as they didn't follow up Millwall. I think that might be a bridge too far for them now. But you could have probably argued that was the case before, and they found something at Blackburn, and then the horizon looked possible. But it's a massive game for them. There's no doubt. But they're all big now at this stage because they're not seizing the opportunity. And when you don't do that, you are looking for who's playing X and who's playing Y, because you are now firmly in that category where it's not just what Norwich do, it's what others don't do if you're going to get into the top six. And that's the corner they've backed themselves into. So on we go to Middlesbrough, and let's see if in adversity they can perform like they did at Blackburn.
Yep, I think before or after the international break, I said it would be 5 wins. They've won 1. They've got 5 left. So what's that maths wise? 3 from 5. Even I can work that out. It's going to be interesting to see how it goes. We'll of course be at the Riverside Stadium for next Friday's game. Thank you very much to Sky for bringing that forward for TV, and an 8 o'clock kickoff as well, which is a wonderful time. So really looking forward to that. Although it is the last kind of overnight long haul one, so that's a bonus, I suppose. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for watching, and we will of course see you again very, very soon. We'll be recording a pod probably after the women's game. They have Ashford at Carrow Road next weekend. Obviously, if you haven't got a ticket, go and get yourself a ticket. I think there's more than 5,000 sold now, which is a wonderful return, and hopefully they can add a few more onto that gate as well. We'll of course be at that game as well. So it's an interesting week ahead. Let's see where Norwich City find themselves after Middlesbrough. Thank you very much for listening. See you again very soon.